Good afternoon, fourth graders. Before you guys get started on your review activity, I thought it would be really important to first think about how we learned about Jamestown in our class. So, when we learned about the starving time and the hardships that the Jamestown settlers faced, the activity that we did to think about that was no snack, bad water in our school, and listening to those buzzing mosquitoes. If you guys can think back and remember, I made it so we had no snack, and I told Miss Durkin that the water was bad, and you guys were all upset with me, but think about how the Jamestown settlers would have felt having to deal with all of those issues. We also learned of the 4 S's of the starving time. And remember, that was sickness from mosquitoes, the salty water, that storehouse fire that burned all their food, and then finally the lack of skills. They didn't have any skills to farm or get food. Now, the next thing that we learned about were the solutions to the starving time. So the way that they solved some of those problems is, looking back, the way that we learned about the solutions to the starving time is that we thought of our own solutions. What would we do to fix those problems? We also thought about how Captain John Smith created that forced work program. He said if you don't work, then you won't get to eat. We also learned how the supply ships arrived just as those Jamestown colonists were about to leave and abandon Jamestown. So that's how they solved some of those issues and the hardships that they were facing. We also learned about the Jamestown's interactions with the native people. So to learn about that, the activity that we did was we thought about if aliens landed here in Ashburn. And when that started out, most of us said that, hey, we'd be peaceful because we want to help them. They have that advanced technology. We'd want to trade with them. But eventually, after more and more arrived, we thought, hey, these people are invaders. They're coming and taking our homes and our land, so we'd want to attack them. And that's exactly what happened with the Jamestown settlers and the Native Americans. They started out peaceful, but eventually the Native Americans saw the Jamestown settlers as invaders who wanted to take their land. Now, we also thought about some of the important people, and to learn about that, we drew comics of those important people. Remember, we had Captain John Smith, who traded. We had Pocahontas, who initiated that exchange and interaction. She believed in peace between the natives and the Jamestown settlers. And then finally, we have Chief Powhatan, who taught the settlers important survival skills. We also learned about the arrival of new groups of people in Jamestown. And to learn about that, we watched that Guardians of Jamestown video. And if you think back to that video, the first group that we heard about arriving in 1619 were the Africans, and they were captured by Portuguese sailors, and then by arriving in Jamestown, they were eventually made into slaves and unfortunately indentured servants, but that allowed for the tobacco industry to expand. We also learned about women that arrived to Jamestown in 1620, and that made it possible for the settlers to start families, which made Jamestown a more permanent settlement. Now, finally, the last thing we learned about was the General Assembly and Jamestown. And the way we learned about that was our Land of Floyd government. And if you think back to that, we had those 3 different parts. We had the governor, me, who was appointed by King Marple. We had our burgesses, who were elected by each of the groups in our classroom, and there were 2 per each group. We also learned about the governor's council, who was chosen by me, the governor of our classroom. Then some important dates and things to remember about the General Assembly is that in 1619, that's when it first happened. That's when the first General Assembly happened in Virginia and in Jamestown. But eventually, by 1640, they split up. They met as separate parts of our government. And the House of Burgesses eventually got its name, and it met as the first legislative or lawmaking body in English North America. Eventually, it became the Virginia General Assembly, which is still our legislative or lawmaking body today. And that's how we learned about all that stuff in Jamestown that will be on your quiz tomorrow. So I expect you guys are going to be awesome for the sub and working in partners with somebody that's going to help you focus. So I'll see you guys tomorrow.